This is Laura London, and you're listening to Speaking of Jung. My guest today is Jungian analyst, author, and astrologer, Dr. Monika Wikman. Dr. Wikman received a Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego and a diploma in analytical psychology, which is the degree of a Jungian analyst, from the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology, according to C.G. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz in Zürich, Switzerland. She has taught in the graduate department at California State University, Los Angeles, and conducted a multi-year research study on dreams of the dying at the University of California, San Diego Medical Center. She is the author of Pregnant Darkness, Alchemy and the Rebirth of Consciousness, and the chapter Night Sky as Alchemical Mirror, Sophia's Dreaming, in the book The Dream and Its Amplification, edited by Jungian analysts Errol Shallett and Nancy Swift-Ferlotti. Dr. Wikman is currently a member of the New Mexico Society of Jungian Analysts and is a frequent lecturer at various Jung centers in the United States. She also conducts several yearly workshops and seminars. Her interests include astrology, alchemy, the subtle body, dreams and preparation for death, horses, and equestrian arts. This interview was recorded on Thursday, February 23rd, 2017, through the magic of Skype. I'd like to ask you about your degrees, because you have both a Ph.D. in psychology and you have the degree of a Jungian analyst, which is the Diploma in Analytical Psychology. And could you just explain a little bit about the difference?
Sure. So in the 80s, I decided to get a clinical psych Ph.D., and I did that in San Diego. And that's a really rich training that's really helpful, that is real particular to real practical ways of assisting people with all kinds of levels of life's problems and psychological defenses and, whole bodies of understanding, of course, that come in through clinical psychology that are highly valuable. And I'm really glad I have that as a foundation. Mm-hmm. And then I started, as soon as I graduated, I immediately started the training program in Switzerland in the von Franz group.
Oh, you did. So you immediately went to Zurich. And why did you choose the center as opposed to the Jung Institute?
I had been deeply touched by the writing of Marie-Louise von Franz and had dreams about her that were extremely helpful in my life and in my work. And when I did my doctoral thesis, I did it on the dreams of the dying, and I consulted with her throughout that process to design it and kind of reach into the psyche to take a look at the phenomenon of death through dreams. And so it seemed like a real natural fit. I actually ended up being the first person to start at that group. I was the first English-speaking person at the von Franz group, and she told me that it had just formed and that I might want to take a look at it. And it ended up being just right for me, a definite right fit. Couldn't have imagined a better fit, actually. And I also trained at the beginning with the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts, and I very much valued what I got through that group as well. But when I went on to finish training, I decided to do it through the von Franz group. The richness of that group is probably a whole conversation in itself. It's especially if you have a psychology degree underneath you, and then you go to get that training, I think it's particularly valuable. So I was inspired by von Franz. Yeah.
No, I was just curious how long it took you to get your PhD, and then how many years additionally to become a Jungian analyst.
That's funny, Laura. It makes me kind of smile. The arduous long length of traveling the fate of the Saturn in my birth chart. I have Saturn in the third house, and I have had a lifelong journey of picking up some course of study. And so, for example, I took 5 years through my bachelor program to do a double major in psychology and also Spanish literature. And then when I got into the PhD program, the research project I took on took extra length of time because it was 1,500 dreams, and just I really bit off way too much in a way. Amazingly managed to finish that. That took me, I think I took a break partway through for a few years while I had my own personal transformative kind of spiritual emergency, if we use Groff's words. And then when I came back to finish the doctorate, that was a whole nother 3 or 4 years. So I took quite a while in the doctoral program. Then when I got into training, it's kind of a funny story. I loved the training process so much and was just getting so nourished in the field with that group that I actually had to make myself finish. I had to realize that I would fall asleep in the mother archetype if I tried to stay longer. So I finally had to emerge out of that. I think I took 9 years to finish the training. And
the training to become a Jungian analyst.
Yes. I took 9 whole years traveling back and forth to Switzerland with great joy. I would have taken even longer and never graduated had I followed a certain part of myself.
And was von Franz still alive at the time?
Yes, she was. She was still alive, although she'd gotten quite sick. And she was the honorary first president of that group, of that society. And people that have analyzed with her, ended up being the central analysts that formed the group. And it really, in fact, the title of that, training group, which doesn't really consider themselves necessarily a training group, which I also appreciate about them. They would have this, saying at the end of each opening to the 2-week seminars, that went something about, only Jung's statement that only that which can die, is that which can be truly alive. And to remember the capacity for any society, to have to always look in to say to itself, is what we're doing alive? And is it for the nourishment of the moment with the reality of the psyche? This group had that at the center. It's a gem that's at the center of that group that really turned my heart on fire. And I realized it isn't really, quote, training that I needed. It was really the contact and nourishment of that kind of a process and program. So they would say that, don't count on this as a training program. Don't think of it that way. Come to, because it is where you're called and, something is getting nourished in the field with the psyche. Because if we find out this isn't alive, moment to moment, we will stop it. So that created a field that became actually quite alive. And so, yes, it did take me 9 whole years. I still whimsically look over my shoulder, wishing I still had more contact with that group.
And we're talking about the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology, according to C.G. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz in Switzerland, in Zürich. And are you currently teaching with the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts? I know that there, where you are in New Mexico, there is a Jung Society in Santa Fe.
Yes, our Santa Fe group is really happy to have returned to training in the right timing, and the Santa Fe Society's been training with the Interregional group. Okay. And and Jacqueline Levine has been heading that up in Santa Fe with great heart and diligence. And I do teach in that program some, and many other local people that she draws in. And that's a joy. It's a good group.
Yeah, I've been visiting New Mexico for quite some time now, and it's not a very densely populated area. It's mostly open land. And so I was just kind of surprised that the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts would have a group there. Why is that? I think most people know about Jung's visit to New Mexico if they've read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and his visit to Taos Pueblo and the interesting conversations he had with the Native Americans there. And I don't know, does that have anything to do with how that and why that group formed?
I think that is a really sweet question. I smile at it, and it is a marvel that there are so many deeply steeped, well-seasoned Jungian analysts that live in New Mexico. In Santa Fe, surrounding the Santa Fe area, Albuquerque has a thriving community too that we're all part of. And what draws people to New Mexico? You're so right in asking that wide open vistas, the landscape, the indigenous soul. that lives in the land still.
Yes.
The think tanks that have also formed, the reality of the Oppenheimer and the whole creation of the bomb. It is totally a land of paradox. And really the paradox is that we really feel stretched in today from, the alchemy of war and war realities to the indigenous soul that still lives on the land that it originally had. They were not relocated. And there's something very, very powerful. Many analysts do flock to the area. We have probably one of the bigger societies in the States, and really rich, interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know that the soul of New Mexico drew me decades earlier in the 70s. I remember coming out and then coming out in the 80s again, and then finally moving there in 89. Drawn to this definitely the soul of the land.
I was just looking through my notes here because you mentioned in your book Pregnant Darkness the dancers, and is it, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, the Heyoka dancers at Taos Pueblo? But
yes.
I'm going to be jumping ahead here. I want to mention why I wanted to bring you on here today. There's a big Jung Center in Houston, Texas, and I know everything's kind of bigger in Texas, but this is probably the largest Jung Center in the country. I don't know if that's correct, but it seems so. It started in 1958. It's the C.G. Jung Educational Center of Houston, Texas. And I saw that back in December that you were giving a lecture, and the title really caught my eye. It was Refining Your Inner Bullshit Detector. And I thought that was great. And in the description there, you say that alchemical work starts with the prima materia, the shit that we find ourselves in, and that we need to grow an inner compass or a bullshit detector to guide us when we step into the unconscious or when we're somehow full of it. So I love that. And I'm wondering what made you say, I'm going to do a lecture on this.
Well, I think it is rather mysterious how I sort of fell into doing this lecture, because recently Jung groups in different places for the last couple of years, this has been sort of all the things that I do, which strangely, this is the one that's caught the most attention and has been sort of multiplying itself. I've managed to do this at a number of different societies and groups, and I've wondered, how did I get into it? And also, how is it that people are hungry for it? What's stimulating about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, Laura. It's, I don't think that any of us in dealing with the unconscious, can probably have a chance to pause and marvel enough at the course corrective nature of the psyche with all of us, with our conscious attitudes and plans. It's constantly giving us course corrections and attitude adjustments. And sometimes it can strike us as actually quite funny, the ways that it does that. And there's an earthiness, when we kind of get this reality up front, that this is what the psyche's busy doing with all of us, and really in a nonstop kind of way. So I think there's something about, the alchemists, would talk about, that, the prima materia, the chaos, where we might feel troubled, or where something might feel tangled, or where we're one-sided, or where we're blind, to work with the prima materia, the original material, is always what they have said would lead to the gold. And also they'd say, as soon as you have the negretto, the darkening, the not knowing on your hands, and you've got that in your hands, rejoice because you have the beginning of the work. Really take that in, rejoice if, as they say, if your stone goes black, because then you have the beginning of the work. And that attitude is such a really beautiful adjustment that the conscious ego can make around what is lost and found. The ego to become more agile in relationship to the unconscious, and to understand it's where we don't know, and where we're vulnerable, and where we're wounded, and where we're insecure or unsure, or where we have a chance to even pause to ask for a different point of view than our dominant attitude. As soon as we do that, as soon as the ego does that kind of a check with the presence of the unconscious, then we're working with the prima materia. So there's something incredibly universal and daily about that attitude adjustment that begins to be rather humorous when we take a look at it. So I stepped into it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Humorous. What do you mean by that? Could you give us an example?
Yeah, let's see. Well, I remember when I was training in Switzerland, and the very first time I got into this, was that, if you picture the Swiss group, that I particularly was part of, and the beautiful, formality of the way that Jungian papers are written and read and shared with one another. And there's a staid formality that's also Swiss and very beautiful. So here I was coming from the United States. I'm a definite horseback rider. I've spent many, many miles happily in the saddle, and I am coming from my funky little ranch in Tesuque, New Mexico, and they're going to want me to do some kind of presentation for the Swiss group. First of all, most of them don't speak any English, and I'm the first English-speaking person, so I decided that the play just had to happen. And I stepped over the threshold with a talk sounding very formal at the beginning. So I'm sitting, in all these staid desks, and I'm sitting up front with my hair in a bun, and I look formal with a little suit on and some papers out, and I say, well, this serious work with the unconscious, with the religious instinct that von Franz has taught us so well, it cannot go on at all unless we have an IBSD. You can see the Swiss looking at me. And then I stand up and I write on the board, an inner bullshit detector. And I could see them just taking a double check, like, what is she doing? What is she talking about? So what happened was the group finally found a beautiful inroad into laughter together. And it was very sweet what happened, because the inner compass that does shift us, that is about the religious attitude, it's constantly wanting to play with the ego to actually it makes fun of our point of view. And when we get that and we go with it, and we can find the way to laugh at ourselves, then of course the psyche gets bigger, our points of view get larger, and we're connected to the larger self. This is often so much the case. So anyway, what ensued that night, I'll just tell you since we're on to the story of it. So after the lecture was done, we went off to one of the events that we usually would take off to in one of the local nearby communities. We went to Lucerne, and Lucerne is a completely clean, immaculate, beautiful Swiss city. And just completely immaculate. Your trash is put out at a certain moment in time right before the truck arrives. All your flower boxes have to be perfectly painted. I mean, the Swiss persona of perfection is quite amazing. So after this talk, we step off the bus, and a couple on the bus that had fallen in love, and were trying to deal with what this was going to mean in their lives, the two of them stepped off the bus and they stepped into, yes, a giant pile of dog shit. And they began to laugh, which was incredible. And one of the analysts who had stepped into this stepped back onto the bus, put his little finger in the air, and in his broken English said to me in the most delightful way, a bit of synchronicity. And it's all right there. The agility, the humanness, the beauty to go with the psyche with whenever we step into any portion of prima materia, to have that agile attitude about what is the psyche up to with me in this moment, and the capacity not just to go with it, but also to laugh with it. I think I learned more in that moment of training probably than any other moment.
And you speak about, in this, you speak about our one-sidedness. And so is it the case that the more one-sided we are, the more this other side's going to come out?
Yes. There's so many different ways that we are all become one-sided. And in a joking way, if we think of what a Jungian sin is, and sin means missing the mark, the way that we miss the mark with the greater self, the number one way is our one-sidedness. And, this is true of every single person. And typology lands us in that right off the bat. If you're a thinking type or an intuitive type, feeling type, sensation, thinking, however you land on the medicine wheel, the opposite polarity is something that you keep in mind, because the larger self will constantly be bringing the polarity in for your own wholeness. And like the native traditions have known with medicine circles, we're all born in a certain direction, and we learn to have the energy circulate and navigate the larger mandala of the self that shows up in these medicine wheels that then creates greater wholeness. So soon as you know, for example, that you're an intuitive type, then you know sensation is going to be a place where constantly you're getting rebalanced. And that's true in my life. I'm definitely an intuitive type. So to be in constant respect for the earthy realms of sensation, and to learn to tend those. The self directs us there, because wherever our one-sided side is, let's just stay with the typology wheel for a second. Wherever you're born, Laura, for example, on the typology wheel, you may know where the inferior function lies, and where, the self is trying to grow you into more wholeness. It will bring the devils and the numinosity in through where the inferior function actually is. And you can watch your journey over time, the wholeness that the self is growing through holding that polarity. So everybody's got that as a one-sidedness somehow, working with the shadow. So the shadow does bring up the other side.
And I'm glad you mentioned the shadow, because it's every time I tweet about the shadow on Twitter, it seems to be the topic that gets the most attention. And so the shadow is what is unknown, right? And often incompatible with our conscious attitude and our ideas and experiences, and all that we think is not us. So, the unknown parts of ourselves, of our psyche. And you had written something about how, that really got my attention, about how the work that we do on our own shadow benefits the world around us and the greater collective too. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Maybe we get there via a little dream piece, because I think the dream, it helps. I think it helps us see how the unconscious is addressing exactly that. And in the dream, this is a dream of mine that I had years ago, and as we watch what's happening in our collective world, I think this dream and other dreams around the collective become even more important, that really show this working out of the shadow. So in this dream, in this portion of the dream, I am seeing that there is a storm of evil that is collective, that has grown in the sky, and it's gotten quite large. I can see it moving in the sky. And I'm in the back shed of my house in this dream, and I'm feeding horses and other animals some grain and such. And I also have put, evidently, onto the house little gargoyle-like demonic creatures. But interestingly, they're not looking outside. They're on little plants looking inside. And I can tell this has a protective energy to it, these demonic little figures on these plants. And I've watered the plants, and I'm feeding the animals. And then I find myself saying in the dream a little prayer, and I'm saying, may we be granted the capacity to pull out of that collective shadow, my portion of the shadow, so that this collective evil lessens. That the collective evil will lessen. Can I pull out of the storm of collective shadow, my shadow, so that the collective storm of evil may lessen? And this really gets to what Jung is speaking about, that each person, if we work with our own shadow, we would then know that we are actually not about being good or bad, and that kind of polemic and that kind of splitting, and that kind of polarizing. But instead, he says that we would know that we're also mildly evil, that we would integrate enough of the stuff and sulfur of the shadow, the repugnant shadow, for example, that we try to reject about ourselves, that we might see in others, or might come up in ourselves at times, to really work with that and grow more of a relationship to it and come to understand and integrate it. One of the pieces I think that we see, Laura, these days, that's so strong, of course, would have to do with aggression. I'd like to direct your listeners to Jacqueline West and Nancy Doherty's brilliant book called Matrix and Meaning, where they're looking at character structures. I think that book as just, boy, it's such a gem for taking a look at the way integration of the shadow operates, because they're looking at character structures, and particularly this middle path that they're looking at around the psychopath is, I think, really got our attention when we look at our world politics today. Every one of us, if we can find the part of us that where we stand with dominance and aggression, where each of us personally stand with dominance, aggression, how it operates through us, moves through us, or how we're allergic to it, and how we may be running from even taking a stand, using positive aggression, like biting through to have a place in the world, in your family life, in your relationships, and your career. One must live one's life and take up the actual space and oxygen that is one's life, and that takes a little bit of positive aggression to hold one's own, as we know, and instinctually it does. So our collective storm right now is full of so much aggression. If people live in fear and just leave the aggression outside, projected onto politicians and superpowers that are operating in that dominance, predator-prey domain, if we leave it all outside, we only make the shadow of the collective get worse.
Yeah.
And for us, so we find the psychopathic or the predator-prey stuff inside ourselves, or where we struggle to even hold a little tiny piece of earth and have a name in this world. Wherever one stands with those issues, on what side of the polarity, if we work it, we help that collective evil lessen.
Mm-hmm. I didn't want to bring this up, but it's everywhere. And it started with Dr. Tom Lavin giving a lecture at the Jung Center here in Chicago about what he was calling the Trump phenomena. And Trump hadn't even been elected yet. And I went to that lecture, and Dr. Lavin meant it to be about the collective shadow, and people in the audience, they were upset. They wanted it to be about Trump is evil and he's awful, and and Lavin wasn't going there. And I had him on this podcast, and I really still think people missed what he was trying to say, is that this is about us. And still my Twitter timeline, and I'm off of Facebook now, partly because of this, but it was just all about what an evil, horrible person Donald Trump is, and what we need to do about it. And I thought, well, there's something we're not getting here, and there's just all of this awful, just these people that I've known for years are now just showing just this ugliness, and it's really bothering me. And I don't want to say anything publicly, because just for fear that I'm going to be labeled or seen as not being on their side. And I just stay out of it. But I just feel like everybody just expects everybody else to just jump on this bandwagon and just agree and bash and be angry. And I don't think that's going to get us anywhere. What do you think?
Well, Laura, I appreciate that we've gone there right away together, you and I, in this conversation, because it is where the great conversation of the world is sitting for and not just for Americans. This is where we're sitting, isn't it? And, it's sweet that you saw the inner bullshit detector topic go to Texas, because I was amazed that they had become there. And of course, it was right after the election. And here we are sitting with this and how to hold this. And you're going right there beautifully, that it's beyond right left. And when we get too bogged down in that kind of polemic and polarizing with each other about sides, like you just said, and forcing projections, we're only increasing the infection that's going on. There is a psychic infection that is operating that we're having to really watch for. And regardless of where one sits around one's values and what one wants in terms of who one would vote for or political agendas, the psychic infection around the way this kindling and high flammability is spreading. And of course, Trump and the media, the way the back and forthing is going on around highly flammable, reactive, energy is people are catching it and needing to really watch out about how we spend our time and energy, watch our own nervous systems and our own bodies. And, if we really are going to hold a line with the unconscious and the religious function, then that means the body, the instinctual, the parasympathetic nervous system that does rest and digest, not just fight, flight, that the infection in the world is doing. So I think people getting caught in the infection has been, very painful. I had a dream which I'd like to mention because I think it's how I got on to seeing it this way. The night after the election, I dreamt that there was an infection in the body of the world, and I could see the world body laid out, and I could see the infection in the body too. And then it was clear that some people would be called to work with this infection in a certain way. And the way was shown as each person would take their offering bowl and they'd empty their own bowl and then find where in relation to this body of the world were they supposed to stand. Like in the Tao, where does one belong? How close in? How far away? Find where one is called in the Tao in relation to this body that's infected in the world. Empty the bowl, and then, interestingly, find where your star is located and get your offering bowl, your little humble offering bowl that's empty in your little human hands, and get it to realign with where your star is. And when your own personal star and your bowl realign, then you are helping generate a medicine that actually gives something to this infection in the body of the world. And I woke up with that knowing, wow, this is going to be a long ride and a big work. And I do continually go back to that. Speaking of the inner bullshit detector in dream time, it was telling me right away, careful, Monika, if you step in too far to the infection, you're not going to help anything.
Yeah.
If you stay too far away from it and avoid it, you don't help anything. How are you going to find your place in the Tao to empty consciousness and get connected to, I think, one's connection to the eternal and the human, little human hands on the little human self, the human bowl, and emptying our consciousness and getting connected to something larger. When we do that, how does it help? How is there some kind of homeopathy that then helps with where our world sits? So
you mentioned,
I appreciate what you're bringing, Laura.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned star. What did you mean by that?
Well, star is really a tremendous living symbol that I feel connected to deeply, and I know many people do, and many people have dreams of stars. And I know Lucy Sykes from Kansas City has written a beautiful thesis all on the star that I would love to see be published and have more people be able to get their hands on. And many people can relate to the symbol of the star in different ways. I think what I'll do is I'll answer it via another dream. This is a bit what the alchemists would do, Laura, so I appreciate you hanging in there with me.
Oh, sure. They would, absolutely.
Yeah, they'd say the obscure by the more obscure. So, to give a description, they'd get into yet another symbol. But, I think to answer it, following the tradition, when I moved to New Mexico, I had a dream that a star had landed in my backyard. And I had just moved there. I moved onto a little plot of land 30 years ago along the Tesuque Creek, the Tesuque Pueblo land. And the star landed in my backyard, and the dream showed me that what I was supposed to do with that star light that had landed was to take a little tilling device, like a little plow, and plow the earth where the star had landed from the center, keep plowing it out into a pattern in the earth from the center. And as I plowed it out into the earth, the light would go into the earth itself. And then the earth itself, as I looked, I saw that the formation of the plowing created a star in the earth. And I ended up putting my fire pit in that exact place in my backyard. So into my light of fire, it's in the center where that star had landed. Well, I think the star landing is definitely the way the eternal self connects with us in our little mortal selves and little mortal lives. And what von Franz is speaking about at the center of her work, she keeps saying that we're doing the work of taking the latent greater self and bringing it into the manifest self, the manifest world. And to work with the stars, to work with the eternal core, that has your eternal self in it, that moves beyond time. It lives beyond time space, and yet it wants to come into time space. And so our way of tilling the earth is to, work our little plot of land, work what our shadow is, work what our life is, and see the larger self, the greater self, come into this world. Mm-hmm. And there have been times in my life that I've been really called to have to get really close to that energy in order for healing to happen, in order for my work to be infused with something larger than my ego. We're all called to connect to that larger center in some ways in our lives. Some people have a deeper fate that calls one in deeper to the fire. But I think it is really the way that greater self expressing itself in this world and bringing it into the time-space world. So to connect with the stars, to connect with your eternal source that's beyond time-space.
When you were speaking, as I mentioned, I've been visiting New Mexico for many, many years, and Tasuki, I have to say, is actually one of my favorite places that I have ever been on this earth. It's, for those who aren't familiar, it's a tiny little town just north of Santa Fe on the way to Taos. And the reason why I started going there is because there's this great restaurant in the market, the Tasuki Village Market, and I love the food there. And I was just in Santa Fe over the holidays with my family, and one of the things I love about going to that restaurant at night is on the way back, I like to see the stars. And we were driving, and I love the constellation Orion, and just ever since I was a little girl, and I could see it. And so we pulled over, and there was a fence. I don't know whose property this was, and I felt like I was totally trespassing, but we just pulled up to I meant a gate. There was a gate there, and we pulled into this driveway as far as we could up to the gate, and I took pictures. Orion was like right there in the sky on its side, and that I could see through the gate, and I felt like I had never been that close to Orion before. And and it was right there in Tasuki, and it's just always been this magical place to me. I've not been to the Pueblo there, but I've been to Taos Pueblo many times, and I wanted to mention, before we run out of time, what I had referred to in the beginning, the Heyoka dancers, because you mentioned them in your book, in chapter 4 of your book, Pregnant Darkness. You do mention, the inner jackass, which I thought was hilarious. And my little story of what happened at Taos Pueblo, they have the Heyoka dancers. I don't know how many times a year they come out, but this was, I think, on Christmas Day. It was one of my favorite things to do on Christmas Eve, is to go to Taos Pueblo for Mass, and then the great big bonfires and the procession of the Virgin Mary. But anyway, the next day, I don't know if it's a deer dance or a buffalo dance that they do. And it was the first time I had attended that. And I had gotten in town over at Sam's shop. Oh, this was in Taos. At Sam's shop, they were selling these, spirit hoods. And I got one that is the silver coyote. And cause it was so cold and I just didn't have enough gear. And it's this hood with little ears on it, and it's fake fur, and then it has sides that come down where you can stick your hands in. And I wore this to Taos Pueblo on Christmas Day, and of course the Heyoka dancers that are painted in black and white stripes saw that, and I was not familiar with how they interact with the public, and I was frightened beyond belief. They wanted this hood. And it was like, I'm sorry, but it was like $150, and I wasn't going to give them this hood, even though how great would that have been if I would have played along and let them take it off me, and who knows what they would have done with it. But no, I was just not giving that up. So tell me what happened to me there. I don't know.
I would love to have seen that. I'm surprised that you got away with keeping it.
It was not easy. No, it was not easy. And they came at me again a second time. And I just kept running away from them, hiding behind bigger people. I was frightened. And here I am at one of my favorite places in the world. I mean, I just felt so, it's such a spiritual experience for me. And, you know, you're at about 8,000, 9,000 feet above sea level and at the foot of Taos Mountain and getting to attend this sacred ceremony to me. And these guys, these big, burly, painted, crazy, dirty, nasty, were coming after my, you know, spirithood that I just spent $150 on. So I'm not at all happy with my behavior. I wish I could relive that moment. I would do it differently, but
what would you do differently?
I would
think what you did actually is pretty priceless.
I would have played along. I want to know what they were going to do. You know, I think they were smoking cigarettes too. And these Heyoka dancers, right? Yeah. And, but I just thought if they got their hands on it, I would never see that thing again. And I had just gotten it, you know.
So, you know, I have to say, I think this is a sweet moment, speaking of playing with the star, you know, like looking at what's expressing itself in your life, Laura, when that was happening. And, so we'll talk about the Heyoka second, but I think coming back to what you did with it and kind of what it means that happened to you is really touching. Well, like you, I feel deeply moved and, you know, beyond belief, that enough to move, to be right inside that landscape and feel the indigenous in the land itself so closely, and to live on it, be nourished by it, dream on it, feel it, go to the dances. So I know what you're talking about the depth and beauty that you're drawn to there. And the Heyoka do really catch my eye too. They are the sacred clowns. It'd be like in Shakespearean theater, the sacred fool is the one who knows the truth and uses everything to play with it. And as we know in Shakespeare, my God, the uncanny wisdom. It's like Spirit Mercurius when we watch, you know, the fool, in the Shakespeare story unfold, and the super intelligence and the questions that pokes at everything. I mean, really that's what does lead to the inner bullshit detector and what Jung is talking about with a religious conscience, a conscience that has deep spiritual religious, you know, taproot to the depths of the psyche in it. So how to heal a trickster, intense energies like that serve that part of the psyche. So if you watch them, they both hold the form of dances. They hold the sacred form of dances, and they help the dancers, and they help orient the dancers during it. And they also make fun of everything. They're the sacred clowns then that go around and make fun of everything. And they can, like they were doing with you, they can go up to any participant and mirror them, and, you know, doggedly. It can even feel like, just really intense. The going after what you had on, and, you know, them recognizing the black, white and wanting to play with you. But I get it. It's that edge where you wonder what's going to happen to me. Right. One time I was chased at the Hopi, nation. I went out to the Hopi to, I was chased by, two of these figures, and they were going to put me in the kiva if I didn't run fast enough. Yeah, there are certain dances where that's part of what they do. And
I was not warned. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I just want to mention also, this was in 2012, by the way. That didn't happen this year. This was several years ago.
2012. Yeah. Well, see, that's why I think what you did is perfect, because you protected your connection. Oh. Yeah, definitely. Because you protected, you know, your connection to your own spirithood, and they didn't get as far in with you. Who knows what they would have done? I mean, maybe it would have just been playful, but I have to say on the Hopi, I know that can get pretty serious. I've known people that have been down in the kiva for more than 24 hours.
What?
So, this is indigenous soul, indigenous mind, indigenous tradition, and we're visitors. And so I think what you did was just perfect. In a way, it's like, if we think of it as a dream piece, right? That, you know, the dream ego, you running around there with your little spirithood knew, whoa, careful, and ran to protect yourself and it. And I think for me, it is a snapshot, like a dream of you, Laura. And this gets me to the work that you're doing, in the world. You know, you clearly are, one of the Chiron people. You, through your own work with the psyche, and working with your own wound, I'm sure, you have a healing fountain that you're doing that draws different souls like me and others that you've interviewed. I've really appreciated listening to the interviews that you've done, Laura. You are serving up. Yeah, you're drawn to this, your own creative imprints on it, what you're up to. And that image of you on the Pueblo is perfect. You've got your own little spirit hat that has its Hioka trickster nature to it too. And so in a way, it's like owning a piece of that and taking it home. In astrology, we'd say it's Uranus, the Uranus, Promethean, archetypal field has to do with the Hioka. Yeah. They carry a little bit of Saturn because they do regulate the dance, but they also carry this other part, that's wild. So I think it's an imprint on you, and it's touching to hear it. I would take care of that hat, use it for rituals and ceremony.
Well, thank you for shedding that light on it, because I was seeing that in a completely different way. I was feeling guilty for not going along and playing along, and hadn't really thought of it as that I was protecting myself. Thank you. Yeah, another image that you mention is the donkey. And in chapter 4 of your book, you say that Mary rides a donkey to the stable where she gives birth to Jesus, and that the donkey, one of the lowliest of animals, is also paradoxically the perfect carrier for birth of the divine. So that's along the lines of the inner jackass that you were writing about. I like that image.
Laura, see here, well, I was just going to tell you that of everything that we could get into today, what you're bringing up is, this is your hat. This is you doing this. That line right there, that image right there really is the heart of everything to do with the inner bullshit detector. Because if we are willing to go with our lowly nature and realize then that's where the sacred's actually coming in. Yeah. Like the Christ child, where the Christ child gets born in the manger with just animals and she rides the donkey in, where is that quote Christ-like getting born in each of us? It's really, it's a humble enterprise, and it has to do also with the animal body and, with the shadow and our more lowly nature and living close to that. So I'm moved you brought that in, and it reminds me of the von Franz's work on the Goose Girl fairy tale, where she's speaking about the beauty of the religious instincts when they come in, because we learn to naturally tend right where the spirit of nature is showing us the Tao is. Where are we with the Tao, and where is the Tao? Where do we feel the harmony with the greater world? If we aren't tending the lowliest of instincts, we're not going to be able to attune and live with it. And bottom line with this work on the bullshit detector, the reason I got onto it is because Jung is saying what matters most, what absolutely matters most of his work, is the religious instinct and how we live with the unconscious day to day. So if we live with the unconscious day to day and we find out where our little lowly creature, our little donkey is moving, and pet its head, get used to it, listen to where it's braying to us, where we've been a jackass and I even, I think that really is where, soul comes in. So I appreciate that you brought exactly that line in. How do we feel that in ourselves day to day and live closer to the unconscious because of it, closer in a harmonious recentering place with the unconscious, so that we're more with the Tao, or taking up a rightful place in the Tao. You hit it perfectly. One time I went to Ireland and I went to a holy well, and I was, wondering what I was going to experience at the holy well. I mentioned this in the book right around that chapter. And, to my surprise, this whole time I'm there, this donkey is braying over the fence, he just keeps sawing on and on and on and on. And I'm waiting for my little holy moment. And I realize this is the holy moment. It is the donkey. Yeah. This is it. It's the donkey braying, the donkey and the psyche braying, and speaking and, making the soul known. So it's sweet you brought that in.
Yeah, I like that. And then you also quote, Kabir, the Sufi poet. Just the beginning of it, I love this. He said, "Are you looking for me? I'm in the next seat. My shoulder is against yours." So I love that.
Oh, that's so helpful. Well, that's good, because, what he's doing in there, is really helpful, because he's calling us out of all these places that we think, the divine would be. Yeah. And saying, I'm right next to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he says, I'm not in the winding your legs around your head and eating nothing but vegetables. Not in shrine rooms and synagogues. I'm right next to you. You're sitting shoulder to shoulder with me. Yes.
That reminds me of, go ahead, please.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, you made me think about then that Rumi line, which I think is the same thing. This is why that we should always be getting a surprise with how the spirit of the unconscious is meeting us. It's always outside the ego's purview and what we know, right? So that beautiful Rumi line, is similar, where he's saying, though we seem to be sleeping, there is a spirit that directs the dream, and that will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are. So though we seem to be sleeping, there's a spirit that directs the dream that will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are. And the unconscious loves to use that startling energy. That would be like, the hioka, or making fun or playing or giving us a sense of the repugnant, part of the shadow. But sometimes it's part of the golden part of the shadow. A lot of people actually live more in deflation than inflation. And so living deflated, they have to find out that, the shadow actually is their sense of connection to their cosmic connectivity. So the shadow can come in either side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
but it startles us back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also want to mention the chapter that you did for the book, The Dream and Its Amplification. It's called Night Sky as Alchemical Mirror, Sophia's Dreaming. And it's a wonderful chapter, and I highly recommend it. You mention two things that are near and dear to my heart. One is Sedna, who, thanks to Alice O'Howell, really is. And then you also mention Aditi, who, a friend of mine, the painter Arlene Liddell Hayes, sort of adopted her, I want to say, and used her name for a while. And you mentioned that she Aditi is the throne of blackness. But before that, you recount an incident where you were ill and you almost died. And you said, free falling into the great blackness I went. I fell, and finally the darkness itself caught and held me. And I just think that's so beautiful. And that, in our culture especially, we're taught to fear the dark and get rid of the dark, turn on the light, worship the sun. And what about the darkness?
Yes. Well, it takes my breath away because, it should, right? The great void, the great unknown, the horizons of the unknown, that living with the greater Tao, the greater self, to live with that, we are constantly with our little nose to the horizon of the unknown and to the darkness. And alchemy has that at the heart of its mysteries, is the negretto, is the darkening and the not knowing. And as you are probably really well aware too, the Black Madonna mysteries, of the divine feminine that Aditi, is part of. She's even more ancient, than Christian renditions or beautiful pagan renditions. But the Black Mother, Dark Mother, Aditi is interesting too because she, is a she-he from the beginning of time. She's in Hinduism, she, is both male and female, yin and yang, and she is the void from which all springs, into which all shall return. And we know this psychic reality for growth in our lives, that we need to die before we die. We need to do the death work on this side of dying, to, fully grow into more of really who we are. That's startling us into the who we are. We are part of a rebirthing, reality that the psyche does. And it is the Black Madonna mysteries. It's Aditi. It's finding our way in the darkness, when the darkness may really turn and befriend us, and it may become appeased. Now, this is a central teaching that comes out of von Franz's work, and I think it really portends to where we stand in the world today, individually and collectively. Can we turn and work with our pieces of darkness to see if something in the psyche works with us to help these pieces transform us, and also that the spirit that's moving in the darkness also does become appeased and transform and learn to live in harmony with us as well as humans. We're sitting right in that question. In my life, a number of times, this has been my fate, and through healing crises, and I do mention that in that chapter. I was very moved in that particular moment, Laura, that you're bringing up, because the not knowing and knowing, wow, with the loss of this marriage and having been so ill and coming back from the hospital so vulnerable to be in my house for the first time without my 23-year marriage, I felt myself definitely, just as I laid in bed, I could feel that, wow, I closed my eyes and this is a free fall. I was literally in that, sometimes people do it in sleep. You can feel yourself falling, and it's kind of like a hypnagogic experience, and you wake up quickly. This was more like, wow, I know I'm falling and I need to go with it. I need to absolutely go with it. And in going with it, not knowing what or if anything would possibly meet me, there was no even time to think that way. It's only to be present with the darkness and be real with it and honest with it and transparent, negative, really stay with the negative capability, that Keith is talking about, the not knowing and just walking right into it. And in this moment, I was called to do that. I'm not recommending that for everyone at every moment. Right. In the Tao, when it's time to have a moment like that, this was that moment. And it's true, Laura, what transformed was it definitely became a presence. It turned from just sheer free fall darkness to a presence that held me, that reached up to hold me and hold me on its lap. Just truly a sense of, boy, being held by the darkness itself. And then slowly my life could change. Slowly I could heal, and slowly I could change. Some people have spiritual emergencies, that it's not all, contained and daily. And sometimes we hit really big moments in our life that is more dramatic. And I'm happy when it's not that way, but sometimes that is what happens. And when it does, the psyche is there for us. If it wasn't for Jung's work in the world today and for Jung's work in the world in the 1980s, when I got very sick with ovarian cancer, if it wasn't for Jung's work helping me orient in the darkness that came in through the teachings of Analysts, I wouldn't be here. And so it's to that I always have to kind of bow. I owe my life back to work with the psyche, because it has saved my life a number of times. As it has many others.
Yes, and I appreciate you saying that, because sometimes I am asked why Jung's work is relevant today, since he was writing in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And how would you answer that?
About how his work is relevant today? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I appreciate it, Laura. In a way, we've just begun to discover what Jung was onto. And we just have begun to discover it, and it's fathoms deep. But connection to the transformative realities of the psyche and how to live to discover and live with the larger self, the places of wisdom and guidance and resourcing and healing, and to grow more whole, to create, to revivify our lives with love and energetics and sexuality, creativity. I mean, the source and wellspring of life itself, and how to get closer to it, and be nourished in it, and find out what is ours here to do. In a way, it takes me to, the thought about, for each of us, the question arises within us, how little soul are you doing on your incarnational journey? How's it going? Well, connection for some people with Jung's work really helps us orient with the reality of the soul and live closer to it and fulfill what our little souls came here to work with, to live with, and to create and love and play with. So I think Jung's work is just becoming more and more vividly alive for those who are, I think, hungry and thirsty. Laura, maybe a quote of yours might help here. Okay, this one is one of my favorites of his. And it starts with the line, "The shadow is a tight passage," and it reads like a poem, and it comes from Collected Works 9, paragraph 45, and I'll just read it to you. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one who is spared. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to learn who one is. For what comes after the door is, surprisingly enough, a boundless expanse full of unprecedented uncertainty, what comes after the door of the shadows, surprisingly enough, a boundless expanse full of unprecedented uncertainty, with apparently no inside and no outside, no above and no below, no here and no there, no mine and no thine, no good and no bad. It is the world of water where all life floats in suspension, where the realm of the sympathetic system, the soul of everything, begins. It's the world of water where all life floats in suspension, where the realm of the sympathetic system, the soul of everything, begins, where I am indivisibly this and that, where I experience the other in myself, and the other than myself experiences me. So this is really the work of the shadow and the heart of where it takes us. It takes us into the I thou with all things, where what is outside is inside and what's inside is outside. And that's speaking of how when we work with the shadow, that the contagion in the world becomes less because we know all that's inside has its place outside and vice versa. We find it. We discover what Jung is getting at here. The alchemist called the unus mundus, where the soul of the world is mirroring itself back and forth in harmony. And the sympathetic system where all life floats in suspension. He's really catching that soul reality where we also discover the oneness with the world, with self and other. And this isn't a regressive oneness. This is a step forward where, this is what the alchemists were onto. The more individuation happens, the more work we do with the shadow and with growth, we come actually into higher consciousness, higher and lower. It's a greater development of self. And it is, clearly what they call the unus mundus, the one world. And this gets us to, where is our world going with the shadow work and with Jung's work? I'd like to just mention, maybe you need to go soon. I imagine you do, but the film Arrival, I would really love, to just highlight for your listeners to get a chance to take a look at, because everything Jung was looking at is right inside that film. The connection with the numinous that creates a sense of the timeless, communicating and commuting with the bound in time, and the transformative healing field that gets going as that happens. This is what he's looking at, where the shadow leads us to, is that we're no longer in a polemics of splitting and good, bad, good and evil. Something has transcended, and we are then in a different state of consciousness and holding a different dialogue also. And it's a healing field that we all are hungry for, I know.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. And, I did want to ask you, quickly, that about your work as an astrologer. I had mentioned to you, in email that I studied astrology for 2 years full time.
Wonderful.
Long time ago. And that basis that I got, that understanding it helped me to understand archetypes, and it helped me to understand how and sort of why people are different, and yet we're all the same. We all have it all, we all have the planets in our chart, but they're in different places and they make different aspects to each other, and they're in different signs. And I just was wanting to ask you how you use that in your work, and that I saw that you had written, I don't know if it was an obituary or a memorial piece to Jung's daughter, Gret, who was a professional astrologer. Do you know her?
I did have the sweet fortune of knowing her, and and I also, when she died, I really wanted to honor what her life was about by putting together some reflections about her life. And I spoke to her family members and to other people also who knew her, and really enjoyed putting that piece together, and wanted to stand up also for the medial women, and the medial men too, but the medial anima, that does live in relationship to astrology that Gret did embody in her lifetime in a rich way, in a very rich way. One of the things she used to say that was really sweet, Laura, is she'd say, each person should really write what they're getting to know about from the inside out, and to really spend time writing and creating from what you're getting to know on the inside out. She really I think, is appreciating the incarnational journey of the soul, learning something, and that's where its wisdom lives. What you're learning is where your wisdom is. Well, I'd be interested too, Laura, about where you studied with astrology. Where did you study in your 2 years?
It was an online college.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And No, it wasn't. It was something small, but it was very serious. And it was a group of astrologers, and they were doing this online. And of course, there was nowhere for me to go to study it. So it was very rigorous with lots of reading and writing and exams. And I use that. I use that every day, actually.
Yeah. You're such a unique combination of different selves. Your different trainings. I mean, I was listening to some different pieces that you have on the internet that you've done interviews, people have done also of you, and really appreciate the wide variety of the things you've been exposed to and what medicine you're bringing in. So I don't know about you, but the first time someone did my chart, it was just shocking. It was just shocking. At the depth of wisdom coming in through it. Gay Williams was an analyst in San Diego who sent me in the 1980s to a wonderful astrologer who I studied with for many years and still do, and is a rich being. Her name is Kathleen Burt, B-U-R-T. Her website is Window to the Stars for anyone who might like to have a reading with her particularly. She is the one who intercepted me for the first time in the 1980s when I was very sick and had cancer and was expected to die. I was given a very short time span left for living, and I didn't say any of that to her. It was incredible. I was told I had a few weeks at one point, but I went in to see Kathleen in the middle of this. I was 24 years old and stepped into her office, and she didn't know anything about me but the birth data, and she proceeded to tell me, you're in a life and death crisis. She could tell me, what organs of the body. It was ovaries. I mean, it was a shock. But the main thing is that she said it lasts for 4 years. And if anyone's chart I've seen, you've got every capacity to work with us. You're here to work with us. This is what you're here to do. Nothing's gone wrong. You're here to work with us. It was so clear, and such a transpersonal vision put into the personal realm. And I remember when I walked out of her office and I stood out under Solana Beach, Southern California. I stepped out under the canopy of trees outside of her condo, just looking at the world differently. Everything had changed. Everything for me changed. So I began studying with her, and I like to have people that work with me when they're inclined that way to have their charts done. I try to, absolutely have it be the lead of the client, because many people aren't into their chart at all. And I certainly don't ask people to do them if they're not into it at all. People normally gravitate to it. Usually have people have their chart actually done in a formal reading with someone else. That's better for analytic work. And then bring the material to the session with me, their thoughts and feelings about it and my point of view. So I do that with analytic clients, but people who come for just astrology, I also do astrology readings. And I enjoy doing that. It's a whole different vessel. But I think where I go, is that sense from India that really has the luminousness in it, where, the sense that the soul has its little, council, with, the eternal beings before life, and looks in on life and says, for the good of the world, I think I'll work on this piece of darkness. I'd like to be born here in this time, space, place, and I'll incarnate right here, and I'll take on this piece, for the good of the world. That's one of the fantasies behind it. But the piece that's really imaginative is that sense that, at first breath, it's right at that moment that we leave the free floating heavens and we take on the space time fabric, and we step into time-space fabric, and that the imprint of the stars at that moment of the first breath is the little map of the star chart that is our imprint that we're going to walk with, our little map that's telling us our coordinates for what we're doing and what we're in relation to, what we're going to be working with. And the intimacy of that is just, I find that so beautiful, and I found it to be so real. It helps me daily too. I'm glad, Laura, that you've got your own relationship with it. Yeah. It's remarkable, isn't it?
It is, and I find myself kind of hiding it from people, because the comment I get a lot is, well, how can the planets cause things to happen? And of course, I don't think astrologers look at it that way. And would you say that astrology is a synchronicity?
Yes, I definitely do. I feel it as a deep synchronizing field, and a great grace. It's like, this is interesting. It gets back to the Goose Girl, fairy tale that von Franz is looking at. How do we pay attention to the Tao? And in that fairy tale, she beautifully is tending these geese. And then the sense that the Tao, in the Chinese reality, to tend to the Tao and to look at the Tao, they watch the patterns of the feathers of the geese. Well, we watch the patterns of the stars and planets and muse over our little time-space coordinates in relation to these larger bodies, larger archetypal presences, and the synchronicity field of ourselves. We arrive at meaning through a reading astrologically only by what really gives us that aha or recognition, like an inner instinct in each person that can say, okay, I can relate to this piece or that piece, or this really, gets me down the road imagining into my life. I think the point is with astrology, if it sounds too static, then we've lost something. I remember once when I got into working with charts, I had a dream, it was really beautiful, showed me putting my chart on my little altar where I like to do my various offerings, and in the dream I put my star chart on the altar, and I was told to pray over it. Now, if we really get what that means, that is that, to use connection to the imaginal in conjunction with the star chart, that it's a way into the imagination. It's a way to recognize the energies that we're dealing with. So, for example, if you go through a really intense Chiron transit, for example, and it, let's say you were working with a Chiron return, for example, the Chiron return, if you know it with your mind, you'd be paying attention. Where am I seeing the phenomenon of the Chiron reality bubbling up under my feet? Where's the wounded healer being called in? Where's my wisdom and my wound coming in? In a way, it gets us to pay better attention to our ground of being. Then I think astrology really serves the soul.
Yes, I like that. That's beautiful. So I think we're about out of time now. I didn't know if you wanted to mention any of the seminars that you're going to be giving this year. I saw a number of them on your website, and I'll definitely add links to the Speaking of Jung website for what you have coming up. I don't know if you wanted to mention anything.
Okay. Well, thank you, Laura. That's sweet. With my partner, Tom Elsner, we've been doing a series of 4 seminars a year in Santa Fe, and the Santa Fe Jung Institute is sweet to promote that. And also, we have a little center called the Center for Alchemical Studies. It's a project of a nonprofit. Earthways.org is the nonprofit. And we host active imagination seminars where we do pick up on indigenous themes and go on out to the pueblos and attend the dances in order to get closer in with the indigenous. We've been very graced to have indigenous people come. We're all indigenous at some level in the psyche, but people who've been born and living the whole reality of being of an indigenous culture this lifetime. We've been very graced to have a few people come be present with us as well. So in terms of a taste of the Southwest, working on alchemy, working on physics and the indigenous soul, and then that's one theme. We do 2 of those a year, and then we also do 2 a year to the Celtic imagination, to diving in through Jung's work with active imagination. And the field that we get going with small groups, I think, is really very inspiring to me. I have really loved the way that the encouragement that happens naturally in the field with one another, as everyone realizes everyone has access to the imagination, and everyone has access through active imagination. And what gets built in that is really a gem. I also do a number of things with the New York Center for Jungian Studies that people would find. The Jung in Ireland, it's been Jung in Cuba, the New York one. But thank you, Laura. I think people could find it on my website, which I need to update. 2017 needs to be updated more. But I appreciate very much that your soul and this world is, calling you, I think of as a beautiful Hatara, too. You've got your relational piece, Laura, that's drawing all of us in. And you've also got your own genius and daemon, obviously cooking behind your podcast and sharing Jung's work in the world this way. I listened to Russ Lockhart's interview with you and was very touched to hear just the sweetness and historical moments and pieces that came through that one and other ones as well. And I just want to thank you, Laura, for what you're doing with your own imprint and your own wild and woolly self that has your black and white spirit hat that you protected from the Hioka.
Well, thank you, Monika.
You've got your own calling.
Thank you so much. It's people like you that inspire me daily and keep me going, to be honest with you. So thank you for all the work that you've done and that you share with us. And I've heard your interviews with Dr. Dave on Shrink Wrap Radio, and I'll put a link to that on the website as well, because
you, Laura.
Those are all wonderful. Also, I'll add links to your book, Pregnant Darkness, and the chapter that you wrote, and also the memorial that you wrote to Jung's daughter, Gret. That's in a journal, right?
Yeah, that was in Perspectives. Yes. And, I think I can't remember what year that was at this point. But it was an intro in Psych Perspectives. I think around 95 or 96, that might have came out. But anyone who's interested in that would find her chart in there and also different things she had to say. Well, again, Laura, thank you, and thank you for what you hold in the world. And I do hope for any listeners that this time was somehow helpful in having us orient with how the unconscious is speaking to us daily in the humble and lowly places, and not always the dramatic, but the secret horizon of the self is, in every moment if we just open our ears and eyes. And that's really what Jung is saying is the heart of the religious function. He says that it's the capacity grows to learn to hear and to see in ever new ways. And that's the beauty of the shadow work, is it teaches us to hear and to see in ever new ways that makes the greater self have a chance to come in. And Lord knows, with our collective world these days, this is really an important work. So Laura, thank you for the way you're helping us all serve that reality of the psyche more so.
Thank you so much. You too.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'd again like to thank Dr. Wikman for her kindness and generosity today. Please visit the website speakingofjung.com for more information about the publications and topics that were mentioned today. There you'll also find all of the previous episodes of this podcast, which are available to listen to or to download for free. This podcast is also available on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. So with special thanks to Frith Luton, Talia Eidelman, and Michael Deacon, this is Laura London, and you've been listening to Speaking of Jung.